Alright, guys. Act 5, Scene 2. The end is near. We're in a hall in the castle. And we have Hamlet and Horatio in there, speaking to one another. And Hamlet begins, "So much for this, sir. Now let me see the other. You do remember all the circumstances." So basically, Hamlet is speaking with Horatio. He's returned from the pirates. He's now back at home. And he's like, "Oh, do you remember all that has transpired?" And Horatio says, "Yes, of course I remember it, my lord." And Hamlet goes, "Sir, in my heart there was a kind of fighting that would not let me sleep. Methought I lay worse in the mutinies and the bilboes. Rashly and praised be rashness for it. Let us know our indiscretions sometimes serve us well." So he's talking about the fact that, he felt guilty. He was torn between coming back, not coming back, just allowing, his fate to fall where it may. He knew he was probably going to be killed in England. However, he continues, "Our indiscretion sometimes serves us well." So the fact that he didn't act, perhaps that served him well, because here he is back in Denmark. And he says, "When our deep plots do fail, and that should teach us there's a divinity that shapes our ends." So something is in control of our fates, that something bigger, whether it be God or whatever, that there's a larger power in charge here. And he says, "Rough hew them how we will." And Horatio agrees, and he says, "That is most certain." And then Hamlet's about to retell the night of when he found the letter that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were supposed to kill him. So he says, "Up from my cabin, my sea gown scarfed about me," that's like his nightgown. I guess it's probably not his nightie, but his nightgown. And he says, "About me in the dark, groped I find out them, had my desire, fingered their packet, and in fine withdrew to mine own room again." So he went into Rosencrantz Guildenstern's room, he searched it out, he found the letter, and he took it back to his room. And he says, "My fears forgetting manners to unseal their grand commission." So he's like, as if I forgot my manners, that it's rude to open somebody else's letter. I opened it anyway. And so he goes, "Making so bold to unseal their grand commission, where I found, Horatio, O royal knavery, an exact command lardered with many several sorts of reasons, importing Denmark's health and England's too, with such bugs and goblins in my life, that on the supervise no leisure bated, no, not to stay the grinding of the axe, my head should be struck off." So he's like, it began with some simple pleasantries for, "Oh, England, oh, Denmark, we wish you health." And then he said, but then at the very end it says that they should chop Hamlet's head off with an axe, and they shouldn't even sharpen the axe. They should just take a dull axe to him. And Horatio's, "Is it possible?" And then Hamlet's like, "Here's the commission. Read it at more leisure. But wilt thou bear me how I did proceed?" And so he's like, here it is, read it yourself, but let me tell you what I did. Do you want to hear it?" And Horatio's like, "I beseech you." And so Hamlet continues, "Being thus benetted round with villainies, or I can make a prologue to my brains, they had begun the play." So he's like, I could have lost it, I could have went to kill him. He said, or I could have sat down with my thoughts and figured out what I was going to do next. So he said, "I devised a new commission." He made a plan. "Wrote it fair. I once did hold it, as our statisticians do, a baseness to write fair, and labored much. How to forget that learning? But, sir, no, it did me yeoman's service. Wilt thou know the effect of what I wrote?" So right here he's talking about the fact that he wrote it in such a nice, clear hand, and he was like, so it looked like a great statesman had written it. And Horatio says, "Oh, okay, good, so you rewrote the letter." And Hamlet goes, "I wrote an earnest conjecture from the king, as England was his faithful tributary, as love between them like the palm might flourish, as peace should still her wheaten garland wear, and stand a common tween their amenities, and many such like asses of great charge, that on the view and know of these contents, without debatement further, more or less, he should the bearers put to sudden death, not shriving time allowed." So Hamlet wrote that whoever is carrying the letter and delivering it, that those guys should be the ones who get choppy. And so that's what he did. It's very tricky. And then Horatio's like, "Well, but how did you seal this letter?" Because, back in the old days, they had the little wax seals. They're so fancy. And Hamlet was like, "Oh, I had this." He said, "Why, even in that was heaven ordinance, so it was like a godsend." He said, I had my father's signet in my purse. So, they would melt the wax, and then they all wore these little signet rings, and then they'd pop it on there and seal it. Well, he just so happened to have his dad's. So he used that. He used that. Beginning to speak Shakespearean English. So he folded the writ up in the form of the other, subscribed it, gave the impression, placed it safely, the changeling never known. Now the next day was our sea fight, and what to this was a sequence thou knowest already. So from that point on, the sequence of events that occurred. And Horatio goes, so Guildenstern and Rosen go to it. And Hamlet's like, why, man, they did make love to this employment. Hey, they chose this route. I didn't kill them. They're about to kill themselves. And he says, they are not near my conscience. So he's like, I don't feel guilty about this. He says, their defeat does by their own insinuation grow. 'Tis dangerous when the baser nature comes between the past and fell incensed points of mighty opposites. So basically, he's just saying they chose to deceive him. And when one chooses to deceive, there is a price to pay. So that's what Hamlet's pointing out here. So he feels no guilt for their death. And then Horatio goes, why, what a king is this? And Hamlet goes, does it not, thinkest thee, stand me now upon? He that hath killed my king, whored my mother, popped in between the election and my hopes. So when he says popped in between the election and my hopes, that means stood in front of him, from him becoming king. So Claudius kind of usurped the throne from him. And he says, and with such cozenage is not perfect conscience to quit him with this arm, and is not to be damned to let this canker of our nature come in further evil. So he's like, Hamlet's like, he needs to be stopped. And Horatio agrees. He says, it must be shortly known to him from England what is the issue of business there. And Hamlet continues, it will be short, the interim is mine, and a man's life is no more than to say one. But I am very sorry, good Horatio, that to Laertes I forget myself. And when we say this, he's remembering how he treated Laertes in the graveyard when he jumped in Ophelia's grave and was like, no, I love her more than you do. He feels bad. He's starting to feel guilty. And he's realizing here with this, he says, for by thy image of my cause, I see the portraiture of his. So he's like, by my image and his image, we're very much in the same boat. We're going through the very same thing. And so he's starting to feel a kinship with Laertes, because they both have a father murdered. So he continues, I'll court his favors, which means I'll try to be nicer to him. I'll try to make up with him. And he said, but sure the bravery of his grief did put me into a towering passion. When he says the bravery of his grief, basically he's saying the showy grief of Laertes, jumping in the hole and being like, oh, bury me with her. Hamlet's almost saying that it was just I don't know, it was too much. It was showy. It was like he was just getting attention for himself. And it made him mad. It put him in a towering passion, which is like a fury. But then Horatio hears somebody coming, and he's like, peace, shh, who comes here? And then we have Osric. And Osric's sort of like he's like a courtier, but he's also kind of a messenger, like a fancy messenger. So he comes in and he says, your lordship is right welcome back to Denmark. And Hamlet's like, humbly, thank you. Dost thou know this water fly? And when he says, dost know this water fly, he's talking to Horatio. And he kind of says it under his breath, so Osric can't hear him. And when he calls him a waterfly, he's basically calling him who's this little bug? Who's this peon? So it's kind of some shade. And Horatio whispers back, no, my good lord, I don't know this bug. And Hamlet goes, thy state is the more gracious, for 'tis a vice to know him. He hath much land and fertile. Let a beast be lord of beasts, and his crib shall stand at the king's mess. 'Tis a child, but, as I say, spacious in the possession of dirt. So evidently, Hamlet and Horatio, Osric must be completely oblivious to that fact that these two are talking to each other. Because this little part, Hamlet's just saying that he's important because he's a landowner. His family owns a lot of land, and so those who own bits of dirt have to be treated a certain way in court. So Osric continues. He says, sweet lord, if your lordship were at leisure, I should impart a thing to you from his majesty. And so he's like, I have something to tell you from the king. And Hamlet's like, I will receive it with all the diligence of spirit. Put your bonnet to his right use, 'tis for the head. So evidently Osric has his hat taken off his head, and he's holding it. And Hamlet's like, okay, yes, I will receive your news, but put your hat back on your head. And Osric goes, I thank your lordship, 'tis very hot. So he's like, no, it's too hot. And Hamlet goes, no, believe me, 'tis very cold, the wind is northerly. And Osric's like, it is indifferent cold, my lord, indeed. And Hamlet goes, methinks it is very sultry and hot for my complexion. And Osric goes, exceedingly, my lord, it is very sultry as 'twere, I cannot tell how. So basically he's like, okay, well I guess it's warm. I mean, maybe it's humid, but I can't really tell those things. So he's like, but let's get to the point. He says, my lord, his majesty bade me to signify to you that he has laid a wager on your head. Sir, this is the matter. And Hamlet's like, well, I beseech you, remember. And again, Hamlet is trying to get him to put his hat back on. I don't know why Hamlet's obsessed with his hat, but he is at this point. And then Osric continues. He's like, nay, in good faith, for mine ease in good faith. So he's like, no, I'm comfortable without my hat on. Just let me tell you what I need to tell you. And so he continues. He's like, sir, here's newly come to court Laertes, believe me, an absolute gentleman. So at this point, Osric's going to start talking up Laertes, like what an awesome rad dude he is. And I suppose the whole point of this is to start getting Hamlet upset and jealous about Laertes. And so he continues, and he's like, he is an absolute gentleman. He's full of most excellent differences. He's very self-society and great showing, so he's great to look at. And when he says he's the Carter calendar of gentry, so he's like the poster boy for all that is awesome and courtly. And Hamlet's like, yes, sir, his definements suffer no perdition in you. So he's like, of course you're not lying. All these things you say are true. Though I know to divide him inventorially would dizzy the arithmetic of memory. And yet but yaw neither in respect of his quick self, but in the verity of extolment I take him to be a soul of great article, and his infusion of such dearth and rareness as, to make true diction of him, his semblance is his mirror, and who else would trace him as his umbrage, nothing more. And then Osric goes, your lordship speaks most infallibly of him. So Hamlet's kind of playing along. He's like, yeah, everything you say is correct. Laertes is amazing. I wish we could all be like Laertes. And then Hamlet continues, the concernancy, sir, why do we wrap the gentleman in our more raw breath? And Osric's like, sir. And then Horatio goes, it's not possible to understand in any other tongue. You will do it, sir, really. So he's like, Horatio's kind of admonishing Hamlet at this point because he's like, you know what, can you not speak to Osric in sort of a different tone? You're laying it on a bit too heavy. And Hamlet goes, what imports the nomination of this gentleman? So Hamlet's like, why are you up here telling me how amazing Laertes is? And Osric's like, oh, okay, so we're talking about Laertes. And Horatio's like, oh, his purse is empty already. All gold words are spent. So basically, when Osric goes, Laertes, is that who you want me to tell you about? And Horatio's like, good grief, this guy is already, he's so stupid, that's all he could say is how great Laertes was, and now he has nothing left to say. And Hamlet just kind of pushes this aside, and he's like, of him, sir, like Osric's like, Laertes, and Hamlet's like, yeah, Laertes. And then Osric continues, I know you are not ignorant. And then Hamlet goes, I would you did, sir, yet in faith if you did it would not much approve me. Well, sir. So this is really funny here because Osric says I'm not ignorant, but Hamlet's trying to figure out what Osric wants. And so Hamlet's like, I wish I were ignorant, because if I were ignorant, maybe you would get to the point and tell me what you're trying to say here. And then Osric goes, you are not ignorant of what excellence Laertes is. And Hamlet's like, good God, I dare not confess that, lest I should compare with him in excellence. But to know a man well were to know himself. So Hamlet's like, yes. And Osric's like, I mean, sir, for his weapon, but in the imputation laid on him by them in his meed his unfellowed. And then Hamlet goes, what's his weapon? And Osric goes, rapier and dagger. And Hamlet goes, well, that's two of his weapons. Leading us to believe that, Laertes' only weapon isn't rapier and a dagger, but it's also his intellect and his wit. And because Hamlet knows Laertes is up to something. And Osric continues, the king, sir, hath wagered with him 6 Barbary horses, against the which he has imponed. As I take it, 6 French rapiers and poniards, with their assigns, as girdle hangers, and so 3 of the cartridges, in faith, are very dear to fancy, very responsive to the hilts, most delicate carriages, and of very liberal conceit. All of these things. Basically, the king has wagered that Hamlet can beat Laertes in a little sword fight. And all of these little Barbary horses and all of this business, these guys are what he is wagered. So horses, some swords, some nice daggers, some dagger holsters, some really nice things. But he said delicate carriages, which are the little things on a wall that you slide a sword down into. But Hamlet said, what call you the carriages? What are you calling carriages? And Horatio goes, I knew you must be edified by the margent ere you had done. So he's like, well, I knew that you were going to have to end up asking what one of those things were, because it's just a lot of stuff. And Osric goes, the carriage, sirs, they're the hangers. So the hangers, that's the little things going. And Hamlet goes, the phrase would be more German to the matter if we could carry cannon by our sides. I would it might be hangers till then. So he's just kind of talking about the semantics of the word itself. And he continues, but on 6 Barbary horses against 6 French swords, there a sign and 3 liberal conceited carriages. That's the French bet against the Danish. Why is this all imponed as you call it? So Hamlet's like, okay, so there's this bet. Why are all these things, why is the king doing this? And he says, the king, sir, hath laid that in a dozen passes between you and him. So in 12 battles, little mini battles, the king is betting that Laertes is not going to beat him, and that he'll only get about 3 hits. And so Hamlet's like, and Osric's like, do you accept this? And Hamlet's like, what happens if I answer no? And Osric says, well, I mean the Lord, the opposition of your person in trial. So people would think that, why would you not do it? And Hamlet says, sir, I will walk here in the hall if it pleases his majesty. It is the breathing time of day with me. Let the foils be brought, the gentleman willing, and the king hold his purpose. I will win for him if I can. If not, I will gain nothing but my shame and the odds hit. So Hamlet agrees to do this. He's like, all right then, let's get it on. And Osric's like, shall I, do all this now? And Hamlet's like, heck yeah, to this effect, sir. After what flourish your nature will. So let's get on this, let's do this. And Osric's like, I commend my duty to your lordship. And Hamlet's like, yours. And then Osric leaves. And then Hamlet turns to Horatio and he says he does well to commend himself. There are no tongue else for turn. And Horatio says this lapwing runs away with a shell on his head. And Hamlet says he did comply with his dug before he suck it. Thus he, and many more of the same bevy that I know the drossy age dotes on, only got the tune of time and the outward habit of encounter, kind of yesty collection which carries them through and through the most fan, the winnowed opinion, and do but blow them to the trial the bubbles are out. So Horatio and Hamlet, they're kind of discussing a bit, how Osric kind of ran off in a hurry, that he couldn't wait to do the king's bidding. And so at this point a lord enters, and the Lord says, my lord, his majesty commended him to you by young Osric, who brings you back to him, that you attend him in the hall. He sends to know if your pleasure hold the play with Laertes, or that you will take longer time. So, the king and Laertes are, like, ready to rumble, like, right this second. And Hamlet's like, I'm constant to my purposes. They follow the king's pleasure. So if the king wants to do this now, let's do it. And he said, mine is ready. And then the Lord says, the king and queen are all coming down. And Hamlet goes, ooh, in happy time. So he's excited. And the Lord says, the queen desires you to use some gentle entertainment to Laertes before you fall to play. So basically the queen has asked Hamlet to apologize to Laertes before the duel begins. And Hamlet goes, she well instructs me, which he's like, that's good advice, I shall do that. And so then the Lord leaves. At this point, Horatio says, you will lose this wager, my lord. Horatio really believes in his friend. That's what you want. You want friends that are like, dude, you're gonna lose. Just sad. But Horatio's just, Laertes evidently, even though everybody's like talking him up, evidently he is really good. So Hamlet goes, nah, I don't think so. I don't think he'll win. He says, since he went into France, I've been in continual practice. I shall win at the odds. But thou wouldst not think how ill all's here about my heart, but it is no matter. So he says, nah, dude, I have been practicing. I am good. I have got this. And he says, but something is ill in my heart. Something's bothering Hamlet about this. And Horatio goes, nay good, my lord. And Hamlet goes, it is but foolery, but it is such a kind of gain-giving as would perhaps trouble a woman. Ah, love that. So Hamlet's basically saying, I have a gut feeling much like women get. You know how women get those gut feelings? I have a gut feeling. Well, spoiler alert, Hamlet, you should listen to your girly gut feeling because it would save you some death. But anyway, so Horatio goes, if your mind dislike anything, obey it. So obey this gut feeling. If you don't feel like you should do this, don't do it. And he says, I will forestall their repair hither and say you are not this. So he's like, dude, I'll tell him you got the flu. I'm not even worried about it. And Hamlet goes, not a whit. So he's like, not a word. We defy augury. And he says, we defy augury is basically like, we're being superstitious. And he says, there's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be not now, 'tis not to come. Or if it be now, 'tis not to come. So he's basically talking about death. If I'm to die now, then death will not be in the future. And he says, if it be not to come, so if it's not going to be in the future, then death will be now. And then he says, if it be not now, yet it will come. So the fact is we're all going to die, whether it be later or sooner. It's still going to get us. And so he says the readiness is all. So he's like, I'm ready. And Hamlet's been trying to die this whole play, right? But it's interesting enough because the Hamlet we have once he returns from the pirates is like this Buddha Hamlet. He's like, oh my, he's totally zenned out. He's like, well, if it's to be, it's to be. And if it's not to be, then it's to be later. He's just super zen at this point. So you go on with yourself, Buddha Hamlet. So enter King, Queen, Laertes, Lord Osric in attendance with swords. The attendants have the swords, not the king and queen. They don't have swords. But then the king says, come, Hamlet, come and take this hand from me. So the king puts Laertes' hand into Hamlet's, and Hamlet apologizes. He says, give me your pardon, sir. I have done you wrong. But pardon as you are a gentleman, this present knows, and you must needs have heard how I am punished with sore distraction, what I have done. So he's like, I feel guilty. I've just been torn up about this. And he says, I here proclaim it was madness. Was Hamlet wronged Laertes? Never Hamlet. So he's like, the real Hamlet would never harm Laertes. It was the crazy Hamlet that did it. And he continues, if Hamlet from himself been ta'en away, and when he's not himself does wrong Laertes, then Hamlet does it not. So it's this weird kind of toddler theology of where, crazy Hamlet did it, not real Hamlet. Real Hamlet would never do that. And so he goes on, and he's like, madness is poor Hamlet's enemy, not Laertes. And then this last little bit where he says, it's like I shot an arrow over my house and accidentally hit my brother with it. So he's claiming that's what happened. And Laertes, who is all a big fat act, because he knows he's about to he's about to kill Hamlet. So he's like, I'll say whatever you want as long as I get to stab you. So he continues, I'm satisfying nature, whose motive in this case should stir me most to my revenge. But in my terms of honor I stand aloof, and will no reconcilement, so I hold no grudges against you. And he says, I do receive your offered love like love, and will not wrong it. And then Hamlet goes, I embrace it freely, and will this brother's wager frankly pay. Gives the foils, come on. And then Laertes gets his sharp, sticky one. And Hamlet goes, I'll be your foil, Laertes, in mine ignorance, which means I will show how sharp you are, Laertes, because I'm going to suck so bad at this. I'm going to be so dull at skill. And so Laertes kind of gets upset, and he's like, are you making fun of me? And Hamlet's like, no, I would not make fun of you. We just made up. And so the king's like, give them foils, young Osric, cousin Hamlet, you know the wager. And Hamlet's like, very well, my lord. Your grace has laid the odds of the weaker side. So he's like, you bet against the, you bet the weakest side would win. So Hamlet again is kind of, talking down upon himself. And the king says, I do not fear it. I have seen you both, but since he's bettered, we have therefore odds. At this point, we learned that Hamlet has a bit of a handicap that he's working with. So then Laertes says, this is too heavy. Let me see another. And he's talking about the foil. And then Hamlet goes, this likes me well. This will have all a length. So Laertes says, my sword's too heavy. I'm going to pick another one. And Hamlet's like, yeah, mine's good. I like this. Are they all the same size? And then they prepare to fight. And then Osric says, I'm a good lord. And the king does this thing where he says, set me the stoops of wine upon the table, because he gets the little goblet of wine. And he says, if Hamlet gives the first or second hit, or quit in the answer of the third exchange, let all the battlements their ordnance fire. The king shall drink to Hamlet's better breath, and in the cup a union shall he throw. Richer than that which 4 successive kings in Denmark's crown have worn, give me the cup, and let the kettle to the trumpet speak, the trumpet to the cannoneer without, the cannons to heavens, the heavens to earth. Now the king drinks to Hamlet. Come begin, and you the judges bear a wary eye. So at this point, sometimes the king will take a drink of the wine, because it's not poisoned yet, and then he'll put it down. And Hamlet will say, come on, sir. And Laertes is like, come on, let's do this. And so they start, step, 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 step. And Hamlet goes 1, because he thinks that he got Laertes. And Laertes is like, no, you didn't hit me. And Hamlet calls for the ref. He's like, yo, judgment. And Osric says, yes, it was a hit, a very palpable hit. And Laertes goes, well, again. And the king interrupts and he says, no, stay, give me drink. Hamlet, this pearl is thine. Here's to thy health. Trumpet sound and a cannon shot off within. And the king gives Hamlet the cup. So he takes the pearl and he's like, Hamlet, this pearl is thine. He drops it in the cup. The pearl has poison on it. So now he has poisoned the wine. And he gives it to Hamlet. And he's like, here, you got the first hit. Yay, Hamlet, drink this and die. Well, Hamlet goes, nah, I'll play this bout first. Set it by a while. Come, another hit. So Hamlet's like, nah, I'm going to keep on playing. And so then they keep playing. And Laertes is like, a touch, I do confess. And the king looks over at the queen and he goes, our son shall win. And the queen says he's fat and scant of breath, so she's watching him. Evidently, Hamlet's out there just, he's all worn out. He's like, so basically, the queen says that he's just a big fatty and he's out of breath and he can barely hang on. And so she goes out there and she's like, here, Hamlet, take my napkin, rub thy brows. And so she's like trying to like mop his face up. And she's like, Mom, I'm trying to sword fight. You know, so he's like pushing her off. And he's like, good madam. And then Gertrude evidently grabs the goblet of wine, right? And the king's like, Gertrude, do not drink. And she's like, I will, my lord. I pray you pardon me. And then the king kind of looks to the side and goes, it is the poisoned cup. It is too late. And so Hamlet's like, I dare not drink it yet, madam, by and by. And the queen's still trying to like clean his face off. And he's like, come, let me wipe thy face. And Laertes is like, my lord, I'll hit him now. And the king's like, do not think it. And then Laertes, at an aside, goes, and yet 'tis almost against my conscience. When he says this, it means that Laertes is starting to feel bad about killing Hamlet. He's like starting to have second thoughts about it. And then Hamlet goes, come for the third, Laertes, you but dally, I pray you pass with your best violence. I'm afeard you make a wanton of me. So Hamlet's kind of egging him on. So he has this moment, Laertes says, where he's like, maybe I should stop this. And Hamlet's like, come on, you big baby, come at me. And so Laertes is like, say you so? Like, is that what you want? Let's do this. And so then they start ching, 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 ching again. This is the noise it makes. Ching, ching, ching. And Osric's like, nothing, neither way. And then Laertes goes, have at you now. And he goes, poink, with his poisoned sword. And he wounds Hamlet. And so Hamlet gets mad and like tries to close, what's that called? Close drive? Wrestling move? Okay, I don't know. But he tries to take him down to the ground. And they both drop their swords. And so now the swords are switched. And the king's like, pull them apart. They are incensed. And Hamlet's like, nay, come again. And then the queen like falls, because of course we know she's been poisoned. And Osric's like, whoa, what happened to the queen? Look over there. And Horatio is like, what? Hold up. Those two are bleeding. Because remember, the swords are supposed to be baited, so they're not supposed to be bleeding. But yet, there's Hamlet bleeding, and there's Laertes bleeding. Because Hamlet got him with his sword. The poisoned sword, mind you. And so Osric goes, how's it, Laertes? And Laertes says, why, as a woodcock to my own springe, which basically, I am a bird caught in my own trap. And he says, Osric, I am justly killed with mine own treachery. So when the swords get mixed, when they go down the ground, they're like fighting each other, and they switch swords, Hamlet grabs the poison sword and stabs Laertes. And now Laertes is poisoned, so he knows that he's caught in his own trap. And then Hamlet looks over, and the queen's on the floor, and he's like, how does the queen? And the king, who's trying to be crafty, goes, oh, well, she faints at the sight of blood, so she swoons. And the queen's like, no, 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 no. It was the drink. And then she looks at her son, because, we've had a complicated relationship with Gertrude and Hamlet, because we just didn't know what her intentions was. Does she love Hamlet? Does she hate Hamlet? Did she play a part in murdering King Hamlet? Was she completely innocent of it? We don't know. But at this point, she's warning her son, the drink, I am poisoned. Right? So she's warning him, don't drink the drink. They're after you. And then she dies. So her last act is that of love. So Hamlet goes, oh, villainy, ho, let the door be locked, treachery, seek it out. And at this point, Laertes hits the floor. And he goes, it is here, Hamlet, Hamlet, thou art slain. No medicine in the world can do thee good. So Laertes is telling Hamlet, you're going to die soon. You've been poisoned. I did it. You don't have much longer. And he's like, and for that fact, I don't either. So he continues. He tells him that the sword was unbaited and envenomed, that it was a foul practice. And then he points at Claudius and he goes, the king is to blame. And Hamlet goes, the point in venom too, then venom to thy work. And he stabs the king, Osric and lords, treason, treason. And the king goes, oh, yet defend me, friends, I am but hurt. And Hamlet's going hard. He's like, hear thou incestuous murderers, Dane, drink of this poison. So he stabs him, but then that's not enough for Hamlet. Hamlet's like, no, you got to drink this poison too. Is thy union here? Follow my mother. And then the king dies. And then Laertes, in his last dying breath, he says that he is justly served. And then he says, exchange forgiveness with me, noble Hamlet. Mine and my father's death come not upon thee, nor thine on me. So Laertes' dying breath, he forgives Hamlet. He asks Hamlet to forgive him, and then he dies. And then Hamlet, who's starting to feel the effect of the poison, generally falls to the ground at this point, crawls into Horatio's lap. Horatio holds his best friend. And Hamlet goes, heaven make thee free of it. I follow thee. I am dead, Horatio. Wretched queen, adieu. You that look pale and tremble at this chance, there are but mutes or audience to this act. Had I but time. Ask this fell sergeant death and strict his arrest. Oh, I could tell you, but let it be. Horatio, I am dead. Thou livest, report me and my cause aright to the unsatisfied. So he's like, I'm dead, but you must report to others and tell them what happened. And Horatio's like, never believe it. I'm more an antique Roman than a Dane. And when he says antique Roman, he means that he believes in suicide. And he says, here's yet some liquor left. And he goes to reach for the cup that still has a little bit of the poisoned wine left in it. And Horatio is going to drink it because he doesn't want to live without his bestie. And Hamlet gets irritated. And he's like, as thou art a man, give me the cup. Let go, by heaven, I'll have it. Oh, good Horatio, what a wounded name. Things standing thus unknown shall I leave behind. So he's like, you cannot kill yourself because I'm leaving things undone. I'm leaving things unsaid. And he's like, somebody must stay behind. And he says, if thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity a while, and in the harsh world draw thy breath in pain to tell my story. So he begs of Horatio to tell his story, to tell others of what just occurred in that castle. And so in the distance we hear like shots, and Hamlet goes, what warlike noise is this? And Osric says it's young Fortinbras with conquest from Poland to the ambassador of England gives this warlike volley. And Hamlet again goes, oh, I die, Horatio, the potent poison quite o'ercrows my spirits, the poison is overtaking his living breath. And he says, I cannot live to hear the news from England, but I do prophesy the election lights on Fortinbras. He has my dying voice. And when he says this, basically Hamlet is telling Horatio that Fortinbras should have Denmark, that he should be the next king of Denmark. He has his vote. And then Hamlet says, so tell him with the occurrence more and less which have solicited, the rest is silence. And then our main character dies. He's dead. He dead. And then Horatio, he says, now cracks a noble heart. Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. Why does the drum come hither? And then all of a sudden Fortinbras breaks into the castle, and he has some English ambassadors with him, and Fortinbras like, what happened in here? It's like a bloodbath. Everybody's dead. And Horatio goes, was it you will see, if aught of woe or wonder, cease you search. And Fortinbras like, this quarry cries on havoc, O proud death, what feast is toward in thine internal cell, that thou so many princes at a shot so bloodily hast struck. So he's like, why is everybody dead in here? What has happened? Please tell me. And the ambassador's like, this sight is dismal, and our affairs from England come too late. So basically, he's like, I have something to tell you from England, but I guess it's a little too late to tell you. However, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. And he's like, who's going to tell us thank you? And Horatio goes, well, not from Prince Hamlet's mouth, because he's dead. But he says, but had he the ability of life, he would thank you. And then Horatio says he never gave commandment for their death, which I guess technically, because Hamlet felt like they killed themselves by, agreeing to be treacherous and deceitful. But Horatio is buying it too. He's like, man, he didn't do it. And so he says, but since so jump upon this bloody question, you from Polack wars and you from England are here arrived, give order that these bodies high on stage be placed to view, and let me speak to the yet unknowing world how these things came about. So shall you hear of carnal, bloody, and unnatural acts, of accidental judgment, casual slaughters, the best kind, casual, of deaths put on by cunning and force, causing this upshot, purposes mistook, fall on the inventor's head. All this I can truly deliver. So Horatius like, I can tell you everything that happened here. And Fortinbras like, let us haste to hear it, and call the noblest to thy audience. For me with sorrow I embrace my fortune. So Fortin's like, this is a terrible tragedy, but I'm king now. All of this is mine. And he says, I have some rights of memory in this kingdom, which now to claim my vantage doth invite me. And Horatio goes, of that I shall have cause to speak, and from whose mouth whose voice will draw in more. But let this same be presently performed, even while men's minds are wild. Let more mischance on plots and error happen. And Fortinbras like, let 4 captains bear Hamlet like a soldier to the stage. They're going to give Hamlet a wonderful funeral, as if he were a king himself. And because he proved most royally, and for his passage, the soldiers' music and the rites of war speak loudly for him. And then he says, take up the bodies. Such a sight as this becomes the field, but here shows much amiss. Go bid the soldiers shoot. So, Fortinbras is now king of Denmark. Hamlet is going to be buried like the king he is, and Claudius, and his head's gonna be put on a spike and like toted around as a treasonous rat murderer that he is. So, that is the end of Hamlet. I hope you enjoyed it. It's very exciting. All right, guys.